You might think cowboys feared bullets, bandits, or getting trampled by wild mustangs. And sure, all those things could kill you fast. But the thing that really made cowboys shiver in their boots, sometimes literally, was winter. Because when you're out in the open with nothing but a blanket, a freezing wind, and a stubborn horse that thinks you're the heater, staying alive wasn't just hard. It was brutal. Forget cabins, forget stoves, forget even real beds. Most cowboys didn't have a roof over their heads from the moment the snow started falling to the day the rivers unfroze, and heating, the only fire they had, was what they could build in the dirt without burning down their bedroll. Let's start with the most basic enemy, the cold itself. Temperatures in the Great Plains or high desert dropped well below zero at night, and since most cowboys worked open range, they were completely exposed to the elements. The wind didn't just blow, it cut. The snow didn't just fall, it bit. And there wasn't a warm log cabin waiting for them at sundown. There was just dirt, maybe a rock, sometimes a frozen cow carcass if they were lucky, layered in filth and hope. So how did they survive? Step 1. Clothes, or more accurately, as many clothes as they could steal, buy, or stitch together from dead animals. Cowboys dressed in layers before layering was cool. First came a thin, itchy undershirt, then a wool shirt, then another wool shirt, then a coat made of sheepskin, buffalo hide, or whatever large mammal had the bad luck to cross paths with a cold cowboy and a sharp knife. But here's the twist. These clothes never got washed. Why? Because if you tried to wash your only coat, in winter, it'd freeze into a wool-covered plank, and drying it could take days. Days you wouldn't survive without it. So the dirt stayed, the sweat stayed, and after a while, it all kind of fused together into something that looked like clothing and smelled like betrayal. One cowboy reportedly wore the same wool coat for 5 years straight. When he finally took it off, it stood up on its own. Sleep was just controlled hypothermia at night. Things got worse. Cowboys didn't have tents. Those were for rich folks or army units. Instead, they had a bedroll, which was basically a couple of wool blankets stitched together with hope and regret. These were often rolled in canvas to keep out moisture, which sometimes worked and sometimes just froze solid around them like a cowboy burrito. Sleeping arrangements on the ground, in the snow, sometimes under the belly of their horse, if the horse was calm enough not to step on their head in the middle of the night. And here's where it gets really miserable. Cowboys would sleep fully clothed, boots on, coat buttoned, gloves on hands, hat pulled low. Why? Because undressing meant dying. Simple as that. Some would even heat rocks in the fire, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them into the bedroll. That worked great until the cloth slipped and the rock burned through the blanket, the coat, and their leg-dot boots, socks, and the war-on toast feet were always a problem. Leather boots in cold weather, they freeze. Leather gets stiff, brittle, and cracks. Some cowboys woke up unable to move their toes because their boots had literally frozen shut overnight. Socks? Sure, when they had them. Wool socks were a luxury. So cowboys would stuff their boots with dry grass, rags, or animal fur, anything to create insulation. One famous trick, lining the boot with newspaper soaked in bacon grease. It kept the wind out and made your feet smell like breakfast. The problem? Wet socks meant lost toes, trench foot, frostbite, and rot weren't just things that happened in war. They happened on every cold cattle drive. A cowboy could ride into camp with 10 toes and leave 3 weeks later with 6. If he was lucky, fire was a blessing and a curse. You might be thinking, why not just build a fire and sleep next to it? Great idea until the fire burns out and you freeze, or you fall asleep too close and wake up on fire. Or worse, the wind shifts and spreads the flames across your bedroll. And don't forget, wood wasn't always easy to find out in the plains or deserts. Trees were rare. Cowboys burned cow chips, yes, dried cow dung, to stay warm. And if you think a smoky fireplace smells bad, try sleeping next to a burning pile of what used to be inside a cow. But when the cold cut deep and there was no shelter in sight, a pile of burning cow crap could mean the difference between waking up sore or not waking up at all. So you've made it through the night. Barely. You're cold, you're stiff, and your boots feel like frozen buckets of regret. But now comes the next challenge. How do you fuel a frozen body with no stove, no kitchen, and no fresh supplies? Cowboys didn't just need food, they needed calories, and lots of them. Because in freezing temperatures, your body burns through energy like a bonfire burns through kindling. That means every meal had to hit hard and last long. Unfortunately, the cowboy pantry wasn't exactly a buffet. In winter, food meant survival sludge. Whatever didn't rot, didn't freeze, and didn't require fancy tools to cook. The holy trinity: beans, bacon, and biscuit bricks. Let's start with the staples. 1. Beans, the unofficial fuel of every cowboy fire pit. Dried pinto or navy beans were cheap, light, and lasted forever. The problem? They had to be soaked and cooked for hours, and unless you had a pot, clean water, and time to spare, they stayed rock hard. Cowboys sometimes chewed them raw, not because it worked, but because they were starving and stubborn. 2. Bacon, not the crispy kind you love. This was salt pork, thick, fatty, and so heavily cured it looked like meat dipped in stone. Cut with a knife, boiled with beans, or eaten cold in slices the texture of shoe leather. Cowboys called it striko lean, striko grease, if they were lucky. 3. Biscuits, aka hardtack, or as some cowboys put it, teeth killers. These things could crack molars if you weren't careful. In the cold, they got even harder. Some cowboys dunked them in coffee, broth, or melted snow just to make them chewable. A typical breakfast in a winter camp: 1 tin of beans, 1 slab of bacon fat, 1 rock-solid biscuit, bon appétit acute tit. Snow soup and grease Tijuana supplies ran low, and they always did. Cowboys got creative. That's when snow soup made an appearance. It was exactly what it sounds like. Melt snow, throw in whatever scraps you have, and hope it doesn't taste like boot. Sometimes they'd boil rawhide, especially from old saddles or worn reins. Boiled long enough, it softened into something like gelatin. Cowboys would chew saddle straps like jerky, not because they liked it, because it was that or nothing. Coffee rare in winter. When it ran out, cowboys brewed grease tea, hot water mixed with bacon drippings or animal fat. It was warm, it was oily, and it kept your insides moving. Barely. Frozen rations: when dinner breaks, your knife freezing temperatures turned everything into a weapon. Salt pork became a brick. Beans clumped like gravel. Biscuits turned to concrete. One cowboy journal describes slicing meat so hard that the blade snapped in half. Another entry mentions trying to break a biscuit on a rock, and the rock cracked first. Cowboys had to keep food near the fire or wrapped inside coats just to thaw it enough to eat. Some wore a pouch around their chest under their coat, filled with food so their body heat could soften it. One guy reportedly kept a sausage in his armpit all day. No one wanted to borrow food from him. Meat on the move if you could catch it in truly desperate times. Cowboys hunted rabbits, prairie dogs, snakes, birds. Anything with legs or wings was fair game. Sometimes they'd go after frozen carrion, cutting off pieces from long dead animals and cooking them to death, literally hoping fire would kill whatever already started growing inside. One cowboy wrote, "We ate a deer what froze solid 2 weeks ago. Tasted like rope and sadness. Still better than beans." Some turned to jerk meat, dried beef or buffalo if they had any left. It was hard, salty, and lasted months. Cowboys called it survival floss because chewing it often pulled teeth loose. The myth of the flasklets: get this straight. Cowboys didn't carry flasks full of whiskey. Like the movies say, in winter, liquor froze, plus alcohol lowers core body temperature, even though it makes you feel warm. Smart cowboys avoided it in the cold. Dumb ones didn't. There are multiple reports of men drinking whiskey by the fire, passing out, and freezing to death before dawn. One journal entry says it plainly: Jed got warm, then got quiet, then got stiff. Instead of whiskey, some drank warm animal blood, especially from cattle or deer. It was hot, full of salt and iron, and didn't freeze right away. Disgusting, sure, but when it's that or death, warm blood looks like soup. Meals built around misery. Winter food wasn't about taste, it was about not dying. Cowboys didn't sit and enjoy dinner. They crouched by a fire, choking down bacon biscuits while their hands shook from the cold and their boots filled with frost. Meals were fast, quiet, tense, because if the food was hot, it wouldn't be for long, and if it was cold, it was just one more reminder that the West didn't care if you starved. Let's get one thing straight. Cowboys didn't hibernate, even when the snow came down like judgment and the wind howled like wolves. With a grudge, they had to move. Cattle didn't feed themselves. Frozen fences didn't fix themselves. And if you stayed still too long, you weren't just cold, you were dead. So how do you survive the winter when your job demands 16-hour days in open air, and your office is a horse with icicles on its ears? Let's ride. Horse first, cowboy second. Every cowboy knew, your horse stays alive, you stay alive. In the brutal cold, horses were more than transportation. They were warmth, they were shelter. They were companions with 4 hooves and just enough common sense to avoid walking off cliffs. Mostly cowboys often checked the horse before themselves. Blankets, if you had one, it went on the horse. Feed, the horse eats first. A dead horse meant walking. Walking meant freezing. Sometimes, when it was scarce, cowboys would build fires behind their horses to block the wind and create warmth for both. And at night, they'd sleep curled near the horse's belly, hoping it didn't roll over and crush them while dreaming of better owners. One cowboy wrote, "Me and the horse shared heat. He smelled worse. I snored louder. We called it even. Saddles of ice and leather glue. Riding in winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was torture. Saddles froze stiff, leather shrunk, reins snapped like dry spaghetti, and sitting on a frozen saddle for hours, that was how cowboys earned hemorrhoids the size of marbles. Some tried to warm their saddles before mounting. Others lined them with rabbit fur, sheepskin, or whatever was still soft and not rotten. One trick: sit on your hat for the first few minutes. It wasn't comfortable, but at least it didn't freeze your spine on contact. Riding gloves were a must, but only if you could afford them. Most made do with patched mittens, often missing fingers, stuffed with hay or horsehair for insulation. Some cowboys coated their hands in animal fat or tallow, creating a sticky barrier against frostbite. It worked, but imagine shaking hands after that. Move or die in the cold. Movement meant life. That's why cowboys never stopped, even when the cattle were still, even when the trail was quiet. They'd walk, pace, shovel, swing ropes, stretch hands, slap arms, do anything to keep blood flowing. One cowboy reportedly walked in circles for 7 hours straight while on watch duty, not to look for threats, but just to stay warm. Another rode with his feet out of the stirrups, swinging them back and forth like a human metronome of misery. And when they couldn't move, they sang loud, obnoxious, off-key. Cowboy singing wasn't about art, it was about fighting off death by vibration. Sea shanties had their place on ships. The West had frozen cow blues. The battle for fingers and face. Frostbite was the silent killer. You didn't feel it coming. That was the whole problem. Ears, noses, toes, fingertips, first to go. And by the time you noticed the pain stopped, it was already too late. Cowboys had a few crude ways to fight it. Rub snow on frostbitten skin. To rewarm it slowly, modern science says, please don't. Wrap hands in wool plus leather plus grease. The cowboy burrito method. Hold frozen fingers near the horse's breath. Weird, but sometimes effective. One infamous technique involved urine. You heard that right. If someone was freezing and you had to act fast and, well, let's just say some friendships got tested in those moments. Cowboy cardio, not a fitness program. Trail bosses knew a cold cowboy is a dead cowboy, so they kept them moving, often for no reason. Chop firewood, stack saddles, ride ahead and back, walk next to the herd for an hour. Just keep those legs pumping and that blood hot. It wasn't efficiency, it was controlled panic in slow motion. Some even had warm-up drills in the morning, squats, stomping, and arm swings. Not to stay fit, just to wake up without screaming. The frozen watch, being on night watch in winter, that was a punishment worse than cleaning up after sick cattle. You stood still, in wind, in darkness, alone, with coyotes howling and your knees trembling. Cowboys rotated shifts every hour to prevent frostbite and hallucinations. Some chewed spicy jerky just to stay awake. Others slapped themselves in the face or sang to their horse A few snuck hot rocks from the fire into their coat, praying. It didn't set them on fire. And if someone fell asleep on watch, they didn't just get yelled at. They often woke up with their boots frozen to the ground. The West was always moving. Even when cowboys stopped, they moved. Shivering wasn't weakness. It was your last defense, and they'd lean into it like a dance partner at a funeral. Because out there in the cold, between the herds and the hills, one thing was always true: if you didn't move, the West would bury you. Sometimes the cold didn't just knock on the door. It kicked it down, tore the roof off, and laughed while burying your camp under 3 feet of snow. Because for all the gear, the grit, and the grease-laced socks, nothing tested a cowboy like a real western blizzard. When the sky turned white, the wind screamed like a banshee, and the air itself bit into your skin like a jealous ex. You didn't ride. You survived. And survival, that meant fire, shelter, and not losing your damn mind. Fire was life, and also a death trip. Let's start with the obvious. Fire was everything. It cooked, it warmed, it gave light, but it was also one flick away from killing everyone. In winter, wood was rare, especially out on the plains. Cowboys burned dried buffalo dung, aka prairie coal, twisted sagebrush, and tumbleweed siddle scraps, and wagon spokes, even gunpowder mixed with pine sap and emergencia. Starting a fire. No lighters, no matches unless you were rich, flint and steel, sparks onto greased rags or dry horsehair. If the wind caught it wrong, poof, your kindling blew away, and so did your hope. Cowboys guarded their fires like treasure. If it was windy, they'd dig a hole or build a windbreak out of their own bodies. Some kept embers burning inside metal tins or animal horns, carrying heat like smugglers of survival. And still, fires blew out. All the time. Sometimes at night, sometimes in storms. One cowboy journal put it best: fire's like a woman. If you don't feed it and protect it, it's gone, and you'll freeze with regret. Makeshift shelters. Tents were for the rich. Most cowboys didn't have tents. Those were expensive, heavy, and got in the way. So when storms hit, they improvised. Canvas bedroll shelters. Flip your bedroll over your head and crouch. Not comfortable, not effective, but it kept snow off your face. Snow huts. Dig into drifts. Line the hole with animal hides, and pray it doesn't collapse. Dead animal windbreaks. Yup. Flip a frozen cow. Huddle behind it. Block the wind. One crew used a dead horse as a roof. Morbid. Yes, warmer than the alternative. Group pileups. 5 or 6 cowboys packed together like spoons in an unwashed drawer. If your bunkmate farted, you were grateful. That meant heat. Shelter wasn't about comfort. It was about reducing the wind, trapping body heat, and staying still enough not to die, but not so still that you froze solid. The madness of snow-blind and silent night cheers. What the movies never tell you: winter wasn't just cold. It was quiet. And in that silence, cowboys went mad. Days without seeing the sun. Nights without hearing anything but wind and wheezing cattle. Eyes burned from snow glare. Minds wandered. Cowboys hallucinated. One report tells of a man who tried to cook his own saddle, convinced it was a turkey. Another thought his frozen boots were snakes and shot them twice. Snow blindness was real. Staring too long at a white horizon could burn your corneas. Cowboys sometimes wore makeshift goggles, slits cut in leather, or even charred soot smeared under the eyes. And when one man started losing it, he took others with him. Paranoia spread like frost. You'd think it was funny, but out there, with no fire, no food, and no voice except the wind, your mind turns on you fast. Blizzards didn't just kill. They said when the big storms came. Cattle vanished. Trails disappeared. Camps were swallowed whole. Cowboys tied themselves to each other with rope to avoid getting lost within 5 feet of the fire. Some carried bells, not for signaling animals, but so the others could hear them walking in whiteout. Worst case, you huddled, you held, and you waited. For hours, days, weeks. One trail boss wrote, "We dug a hole in snow, ate jerky soaked in spit, took turns standing to stop freezing." The silence had weight. When it finally cleared, you counted the horses, then the cattle, then the men. Not all numbers matched. Cowboy ingenuity or desperation. Some winter solutions were brilliant. Some were insane. Here are a few real ones. Heat a horseshoe in fire. Then drop it into a bucket of water for radiant warmth. Use dried tobacco leaves as insulation. And accidentally start fires. Build an oven out of mud and bones. Cook inside it. Once, then burn it for heat. Melt snow in boots while wearing them. Painful. But effective. Echo Boys did whatever worked. No one cared about looking smart. Only about staying alive long enough to see spring. In the end, you didn't beat winter. You endured it. There was no victory. No warmth waiting at the end. No Hollywood reunion with a blanket and a girl. If you were lucky, you survived. You got frostbitten, half mad, toothless, and raw. But you were alive. And in the Wild West, that was the only currency that mattered.